Hello and welcome to TVP World Talks, where every word matters. My name is Diana Skaya. In Germany, voters will be heading to the polls this coming Sunday. Now, around 16 million people are eligible to vote. Now, representatives from the main parties standing in the German federal elections took part in the last televised debate ahead of the vote on February 23rd. Now, among the key topics of discussion were the latest diplomatic developments with Donald Trump's administration, support for Ukraine, and European security. Now, joining me now to unpack all of this is Sudha David-Wilp, Vice President, External Relations at the German Marshall Fund. Sudha, thank you so much for being with us here on World Talks here today.
Thank you for having me, Diana.
Now, let's go through this. So, top German politicians and chancellor candidates really faced off one last time in a televised debate last night. Now, what are some key takeaways of last night's debates?
Well, I think over the past 2 weeks, the main issues on the domestic front are certainly the issues of migration and also the weak state of the German economy. Now, these are obviously linked with geopolitical challenges that Germany is facing. But now, after the Munich Security Conference, the tone has also changed toward the transatlantic relationship and security and how reliable of an ally the United States can be for Germany and Europe moving forward.
You did touch on migration for an instant there. Before I ask you something else, how important do you think it is for Germany's next government, although we will find out after Sunday, is it going to be to balance economic growth with social integration in the face of increasing immigration? I mean, it's definitely been a hot debate for the past days, weeks, if not months.
So there's no doubt that Germany is facing demographic decline, and the country definitely needs newcomers in order to keep the economy going. Even things as having enough people to run hospitals, having enough people to make sure that the trains arrive on time. That requires people, and the birth rate is not high in Germany. On the other hand, one also has to remember that the Wir schaffen das, or we can do this, quote from Angela Merkel about making sure that newcomers were integrated hasn't gone very well. And a spate of attacks on the part of migrants has really made voters here very, very uneasy. And I think this is something that the next government has to address. They've tried to do that. Chancellor Scholz has tried to do that by increasing deportations, but it hasn't really allayed voters' concerns.
So how do you think?
Voters' concerns.
So how do you think, aside from increasing deportations, how would the next government? What does it plan to do exactly?
Well, I think Friedrich Merz and the conservatives want to try to take a hard line on migration. They were talking about increasing border checks, but I think the mainstream politicians know that this has to be done in concert with European partners. And so I think there can be moves to bolster deportations, court cases, but at the same time, the next government in Germany will have to move with Brussels to make sure that migration is controlled in a fair manner. And I think that this is something that all Western European governments are facing at the moment.
So, you did mention Europe right now and that importance. Now, many things were said last night during this debate, but now I'd like you for a moment to listen to the following by Carsten Linnemann, Secretary General of the Christian Democratic Union of Germany, while referring to the EU.
As Germany, we must once again assume a leading role in Europe, not from the top down, but with France, with Poland, with a strong European Union. And then we will set a priority, and that is the defence capability of Germany and Europe.
How do you interpret that?
I think over the past couple of years, there's a realization that the traditional Franco-German motor of Europe has stalled. And there's also a realization that the friendship and partnership with Poland has not been ideal, especially in times when Europe is facing challenges like security and the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russia. European economic competitiveness and being squeezed, in other words, between the two powers of the United States and China. So for that reason alone, I think Germany realizes alone it is a very important economy, but it can be stronger when it works in partnership with key relationships within Europe. And that is namely the so-called Weimar Triangle of Germany, Poland, and France. But of course, other important countries are also going to be called upon, and they may be even outside the EU, like the UK, that is also looking to bolster defense capabilities with European partners, probably within the umbrella of NATO.
Following last night's debates, what would you say? I mean, there was a lot of discussions on European security. I mean, you just mentioned that. What do you think were the most pressing issues that came out of that debate?
I think there's a sense in Germany that there is change afoot and that Germany is entering a new era. That was obviously signified by Chancellor Scholz's very historic speech on the floor of the Bundestag in 2022 shortly after the war against Ukraine began, about Germany having to enter a turning point era or a Zeitenwende. And I think that was set in motion, but it will be up to the next German government to make sure that the next German government ensures a new viable economic model for Germany, because there's no question that growth has been subpar in this country over the past 2 years, that it defines what security means within the European security architecture and how it should interpret relationships with traditional allies like the United States. And these will be very important issues for the German government moving forward, and making sure that German voters will have trust in government.
How do you think the outcome of these elections are actually going to impact Germany's foreign policy, specifically with regards to Ukraine and Russia?
Well, I think among the mainstream parties, and those will be the parties that will have to come up with a governing majority, which will be quite difficult if the political landscape is fragmented and the smaller parties make it in, meaning they meet the 5% threshold to have a presence in the Bundestag. For all of them, I think they see that support of Ukraine or the fate of Ukraine has an impact on Germany and Europe and NATO's own security. So I think they will do what they can to shore up support for Ukraine. The question is, how can they do that without the support of the United States, or within a timeline where the U.S. is still playing a role, but eventually cedes the responsibility to Europe, because the United States also sees huge challenges in the Indo-Pacific.
Well, then, of course, I mean, Europe was quite shaken up after, after these talks in Saudi Arabia between the Saudis and the Russians. By the way, what is Germany's reaction to that, if I just may ask for a moment?
Well, I mean, Germany has also been in a period of sort of internal navel gazing because of the election. And there was always the idea, well, what if we're not included at the negotiating table? But there was always a reason to believe, because Germany is now the second most largest contributor to Ukraine support, and because Europe has stepped up NATO defense spending, that obviously the United States is going to want to work with its partners, and of course know that the responsibility will now be passed on to Europe for support and reconstruction of Ukraine. So I think this was quite a surprise, especially after the speech by Vice President J.D. Vance at the Munich Security Conference. I think most Germans were expecting a berating on the part of doing more for defense, but then to hear from the Trump administration criticism about how Germany operates its democracy was quite a shock for many of the people in the room. And I think that this is why Germany is just recalibrating everything, and the new government will have to navigate all these issues. The question is, will they have a coalition that's not that is cohesive and doesn't have infighting? It would be easier if it's a two-party coalition, but it could be that we see a three-party coalition again in the horizon.
And do you think that mainstream parties could actually blunt surging far right?
Well, that will be dependent on how bold the next government is, how it can deliver to the German people in terms of infrastructure investment and investment in innovation, but at the same time telling German voters that it's necessary to spend on defense and to bolster the German armed forces. But this will perhaps require an easing of the constitutional debt brake or a readiness to set up some other fund for these emergency measures when it comes to defense spending. So these are all things that will be on the table for the next German government, which will likely be led by Friedrich Merz of the Conservatives. The real question is, will he require two partners rather than one to form a stable coalition?
Sudha, how do you see the debate influencing the final voter turnout and decision making?
It's quite surprising, Deanna. The polls have been quite stagnant over the past couple of weeks, but what's very interesting is that there is a large contingent of undecided voters, a little over 20%. And I'm wondering if they will break to a certain party and then make a difference in maybe either strengthening the SPD's hand as being a junior partner and forming a grand coalition, or as we've been seeing, there's been a real growth with the left party that everybody sort of left for being dead a few years ago because of also lots of infighting and a split within the party. But they've really been on an upward trend. And so I think a lot is still exciting in a very short and perhaps predictable campaign season, but we'll see what the voters decide on Sunday.
And how do you think that the outcome of this election is going to shape Germany's role in the broader context of the European Union?
I think everybody's looking for German leadership. This has been a plea for many years now, and I think Germany now realizes that it needs to step up because it's otherwise going to be very disconcerting for the prosperity and security of Germany, but also for Europe, and Europe maintaining its position in the world and being taken seriously as a capable actor on the global stage.
I mean, once again, you do mention European security. Sudha, let me ask you this. I mean, going back to the issue of migration and immigration, do you think that this change in Germany's immigration policy is actually going to have some kind of long-term impact or not so much on Germany's role as a leader in European asylum policy?
Well, it's very noteworthy that in this election campaign, most parties have now shifted toward the right because of the migration debate and the obvious concerns on the part of German voters. So I do believe that Germany will also be a strong voice in crafting how the EU approaches migration, because it's not just Germany that's facing demographic decline. That is the case for other European countries. And there's also a definite need for
just to cut you off there, what about Germany's labor sector?
Yes, of course. I was just going to say, skilled workers are very much needed, both in Germany, but also across Europe. So I think these are the discussions that need to be made. How does Europe maintain its competitiveness? How does it attract talent, but also keep its humanitarian stance in the world and allow for asylum seekers to come to Europe? But of course, making sure that voters feel comfortable with these newcomers, because without security, there is no democracy. And that is also the case on a domestic level, too.
Thank you so much, Sudha David-Wilp, Vice President, External Relations at the German Marshall Fund, for being with us here on World Talk and for all your insights on the next German elections coming this Sunday.
Thank you.
And that completes this edition of World Talks. I'm Diana Skaya. Thanks for watching.